Hey everybody, it's Damian Gergiev from the Break It Down Show, and today's guest is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman. He joins on the Break It Down Show together with Pete. Alex came to the nation's attention during the first impeachment of President Donald Trump. LTC Vindman didn't think what he heard in the president's call to Ukrainian President Zelensky was appropriate. Feeling compelled to act, Vindman reported what he heard. Alex's testimony proved one of the critical bits of testimony in the trial. You can get Alex's book, Here, Right Matters, on Amazon. The link is in the show description. Long before the phone call, or LTC Vindman's report, partisan goals poisoned the US government, each party playing an ever increasingly dangerous game. When someone tries to do the right thing, ultimately sacrificing their career to stand up and identifying a wrong, does it matter if political parties control the truth? You already know what to do. Go to savethebrave.org and support our veterans tribe. Also, if you want to support the Break It Down Show, go to breakitdownshow.com and go to the PayPal link, put a little money in it. Also, you can find us on YouTube, where you can watch our live streams and some of the highlighted videos. All right, enough of me. Here comes Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Alex Vindman, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
This is cool, man. I really appreciate you doing this. You certainly don't have to talk to media. You've had probably your fill in many ways of the media. And just for everybody to know, if you're looking for me to attack Alex or to hold Alex's balls, that ain't happening. We're just going to have a good, solid conversation. A couple of Army dudes asking tough questions, because I think ultimately what Alex has already done has been covered in a lot of the ways, and there's not a lot of ground left to really get into that. So we probably won't get much into that. And I'm hoping that we can kind of focus on the current, the very, very current, and then maybe even some future stuff. But either way, man, thanks for coming on the Break It Down Show.
Thanks. Happy to join another Army guy.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you this. A lot of us, and I was with the Army probably more than I was in the Army, working as a DA civilian. Maybe I was on a contract or whatever, but I got to learn how to speak commander. So I get the O5 rank really well. And one of the things I know about you guys is a lot. It is very common to find people that will not vote, a la, plenty of people from World War II is kind of where we got that from. Will not vote when they're actually in service, because we find it to be, and I follow this maxim too, we find it to be inappropriate for us to, one, vote in a state we don't live, and also two, to be picking our political boss, basically. Where do you fall in that?
That's exactly right. It's something that I regret now, and speak about with a little bit of, frankly, a little bit of disappointment that I abrogated my responsibilities, my higher responsibilities as an American citizen, rather than some maybe miscast or a misplaced notion of what apolitical military means. I didn't vote in elections. And when I did vote, I made it a point to not vote for local officials in a state where I don't live. And for that matter, I voted for folks from different parties also, but not consistently enough. And it's something that I encourage military officers to frankly do. They have a higher obligation as a citizen than even as an Army officer, frankly.
Do you think, and we're going to post comments, sometimes they're going to be negative, so, Andy can say what he wants to say, but do you think it's fair to say that voting is a lesser form of service than actual enlistment or commissioning or warranting in the military? I mean, aren't we already doing more by simply being the tip of the spear?
It's not that, I would say it's a more basic, rather than, that's the way I would equate it. You have your basic skills. Every citizen has an obligation to vote. just like they have an obligation to sign up for selective service. And now both men and women. But that just because we take a higher obligation as military officers, service members, we make an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Andy doesn't recognize it, but that's exactly what I did. The fact is that we still have our fundamental obligations.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we can agree on this, and I don't think it's even a point of contention. Even if you choose to go by the Marshall type thing, where you say it's inappropriate for me to vote, I think we can say, you know what? I mean, that is a valid position for someone to be in. You're encouraging someone to stay even more civically active and to vote. And I guess, would you say vote your conscience as well, or have you moved more towards a party line as you've grown older?
No, I think I've always voted my conscience, and I think more importantly, I don't know if that's an accurate representation. Marshall could say that because he was the head of the military. I don't think he would take that and discourage, service members, our officers to vote. If you think about it in the context of like a couple million, 1.5 million service members, abrogating a responsibility to vote when they of all people have been putting their lives to a certain in a couple of decades of war on the line, I don't think anybody would encourage the military not to vote. I think we do have a role to play, and in certain cases, I think it was interesting to see in this 2020 election how the military did vote. In fact, the military voted heavily in favor of Biden. And I think a lot of that was just a pure rejection of Donald Trump. There was an article, I'm not sure if it was the Army Times or Stars and Stripes or Military Times, that showed that President Trump's support waned to about 37%, which is interesting. That the military that is traditionally more conservative, officer corps and enlisted, turned their back turned their back on President Trump, because he didn't epitomize in many ways our military values. He wasn't like, the John Wayne type. He says what he means and means what he says. He doesn't bully the weak or anything of that nature. He's courageous himself. That was not Donald Trump. Okay. That's my assessment. That was not Donald Trump. And I think a lot of the military shares that assessment. And that's why you saw the military turn away. And those absentee ballots that poured in, that the president thought were gonna help him in those tight races, actually made basically made Biden's leads insurmountable.
Fair to say that people that are on the I don't vote because it's inappropriate, and folks that maybe, I don't know, weren't that worried about Trump. Because if you're deployed, you're watching. Look, you and I both know you're deployed. You're watching Fox News in the chow hall. You're watching Fox News in the clinic. I mean, it is. This is just Pete saying this now. It is the channel that the military puts on very commonly. It used to be CNN, but that's kind of gone away. So I can see a world where the military is obviously a mix of people, right? It's very diverse and everything. But the folks that are going to vote, the most likely to vote, are the folks that are trying to get Trump out of office. And I don't know that the military has turned to the left or the right.
I don't think so either.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think they have turned to the left, to the right. I think they voted their conscience on that president. I think the military still tends to be, because it resembles where people come from. It still tends to run, a little bit more conservative.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. And institutions often are, this is an old institution. We have stuff that I read about and I'm like, oh crap, we still do that. It's not just a blue book of manual of arms and drills and everything. All right. So here's one of the things I want to ask you. As a fellow military guy and someone who fancies himself a bit of a foreign policy guy, you're often styled as an expert on the Ukraine. You're born there and everything else. Would you say, and I'm asking in a fair way, would you say you're an expert?
No.
Okay.
I would say, it's interesting that it's always hard to take on this mantle of expert or something of that nature, because there's an element of a hubris of the lack of humility that just is very, very, very uncomfortable. In fact, actually, my background was not Ukraine. Ukraine was a fluke. Ukraine was like a turn of fate. The reason I covered Ukraine for the National Security Council is because there was a shortfall, and I spoke Ukrainian. And the reason I spoke Ukrainian is because in the Defense Language Institute, when I was going through my foreign area training pipeline, I already spoke Russian. So they took an opportunity to train me in another language. So I had 8 months of Ukrainian, and I served in Ukraine for about a year, 2009 to 2010. And the national, just like any other government, institution, if there's a vacancy, they'll look around and say, okay, maybe this is good enough. But my background is actually core on Russia. And I authored the most important documents on why Russia is a threat. Frankly, in certain ways, my argument is that Russia is a bigger threat in the short term than even China, which you could ask me about that one later, because there's a logic behind it. And I joined the National Security Council because I authored the key documents for the Department of Defense on why Russia is the biggest challenge. What we need to do to face Russia is the National Military Strategy Russia Annex, and then the Global Campaign Plan that operationalized the strategy. I authored those documents. I was the first one to do something of that nature, and that's why I came to the attention of the National Security Council and joined as the director for Russia. And then they would have it because I studied Ukrainian, and there was a vacancy. I stepped in to do that too.
Yeah, fair enough. And as a colonel, you got a lot of things going on in addition to your ability to write papers and everything else. You're potentially leading service members, which means you're also mentoring fellow officers. You also have to serve on staff for other people and learn their style of leadership. And there's a lot that an officer does as they climb through the ranks. Is that true for FAOs, foreign area officers, or are you more kind of tracked outside of that?
It's a combination. Certainly, my first decade was as an infantry officer, working in. I had the fortune to start out in Korea, where basically it was laser focused on training your platoon at the time, and there were not a lot of distractions. I served as a company commander, served in Iraq, and then after that, that's when I transitioned to foreign area officer, which is a pretty competitive career field. And the typical you pick up a language if you don't have one already. I picked up a second one. You go to graduate school. I went to Harvard for graduate school. I lived and studied the region for a year. The Army gave me a healthy budget to basically travel from one end of Russia to the other. While I was living in Ukraine, working out of the embassy, understanding what the defense enterprises were, perfecting language skills, understand the geopolitical issues around Russia, Eurasia. I even traveled to China, I traveled to Turkey, traveled to Poland to understand the regional impacts. And then I went to my first assignment out the door was going to Moscow, where I worked as an attaché for 3 years. And this was the big leagues. This is like the World Series, if anything.
Okay.
I stayed in as my first assignment as a foreign area officer. You wear you don't wear fatigues. You don't wear your OCPs. You wear your dress uniform to formal occasions, and otherwise you're there in a business suit. You're blending in. You're just one of the other government officials there. And I worked there, understanding what the Russians were doing. My higher headquarters is DIA. I observed and reported on the Russians and what they were doing. And it became very acute in 2014 when the Russians attacked Ukraine. I became an authority on what the Russians were doing with regards to hybrid warfare. I was seeing it with my firsthand. I write about this in the book that I basically wrote reports that made it all the way up to the presidential level, and it had an impact. And then I was asked to join the Pentagon. And this was now back in uniform on the Joint Staff, advising the chairman, just as we were realizing that our biggest threats were not necessarily a global war on terror, but nation state actors, enduring nation states with nuclear arsenals that could destroy us. and writing the documents that would help us face those challenges, and then coming to the attention of the NSC. Now, the NSC is a little different. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, but
It's all right.
I was not in uniform at the NSC. I was out of uniform, detailed over, wearing a business suit, and serving as a director. And what people don't, especially in the military, don't necessarily get, and it's a hard frame of reference. Frankly, even senior officers don't get it. That I was serving in a by order of precedence in a position that was 3 ranks above my pay grade. So I was chairing meetings as a director on the NSC with deputy assistant secretaries, and deputy assistant secretaries in the Department of Defense hold the rank of 3-star, and that's the level of that. And I'm chairing the meeting with my counterparts from State Department, from the intelligence community, from the Department of Defense, operating at that level. And that's how, it's not that I was a lieutenant colonel that got mixed up in this. It's that I was director on the National Security Council with a reason to be there, coordinating policy for the U.S. government. That's how I ended up in the room. That's how I prepared the talking points. That's why I went on these trips with the National Security Advisor and met with Russian counterparts and all that kind of stuff.
So this is a question I have, is all of that is so damn impressive, right? It sounds like the military is really on the ball and trying to figure these things out. And look, you and I could have a whole show about the Crimea, the Bosphorus, all the different, look at Turkey and how complex Turkey is. People want to talk about, foreign policy. Just in this circle, which is not a very big circle, you got a lot of complexity, and then how do you partner with Finland and Russia at the same time? You have I always talk about this. A piece of Russia is west of Latvia and Lithuania, Kaliningrad. And that freaks people out. So there's all this complexity in there and everything. Why are we so bad at foreign policy? Why are we just so damn bad at it, man? And listen, this is not a political statement. When I heard Kamala Harris's VP debate statement about foreign policy, I'm like, you have no earthly clue. You're talking about running an HOA, and this is not political. It's just a fact. Her answer was a completely ignorant answer, right? We can't have people like that. Why are we so bad at foreign policy, man?
I think a part of it is that I think there may be a bigger symptom of the fact that we don't value expertise the way we used to.
Okay.
And there's a guy named Tom Nichols. He's at the Navy War College that writes about it, the death of expertise. And everybody could kind of Google something and become an expert of sorts. But that's maybe at the broader level. I think at the national security level, we have both a short attention span because we're driven by what's in the news cycle. We're driven by crisis management, and we're driven by elections that allow us to stay maybe focused for a couple of years, 4 years at best. Yeah. And we're distracted by those things that are going to be impactful for elections, rather than things that are actually important for our national security, relationships that might transcend decades and administrations. There was a famous, the folks in the Air Force would recognize it. There's a Vandenberg, a famous senator, that talked about politics ending at the nation's shores. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. I mean, it's certainly more so the case than domestic politics, but internationally, there are touchstone issues right now. Whereas Ukraine enjoyed bipartisan support from both the Republicans and Democrats, because there was a recognition of the national security importance of Ukraine, ended up getting a fair bit of support. Now that's jeopardized by the fact that Ukraine is politicized. It's implicated in the scandal, and based on some just crazy conspiracy theories about the Ukrainian election interference as opposed to Russian election interference, which of course there was no such thing. It was the Russians interfered in 2016 elections. So there's a whole host. I mean, what I laid out is systemic shortfalls that are driven by domestic politics and the polarization of the moment. All of these coming together to really impact how effectively we're able to manage foreign policy, and we're not. There was probably only a few periods of time where we were particularly effective. I'd say as an alliance in World War II, consolidating democracies and the West to face the rise of communism in the Cold War, and maybe I think that was about it. After that, we didn't have the kinds of threats that focused our attention. I mean, maybe some of those are emerging now, and they were both domestic and external. China, Russia, the rise of authoritarian powers, and the fact that democracies on the decline, and then our domestic internal issues, which are not. Yes, there are adversaries that are finding areas to exploit. They're finding seams, but there are seams that exist. There are seams that are tied to the fact that fairly fringe elements that were isolated in pockets across the country are now able to find themselves and really kind of have a much louder voice than the vast majority of the moderate population. And these are just things that we haven't quite dealt with. We haven't dealt with the disruption of social media domestically, or the fact that polarization, disinformation could find purchase in communities that have deep grievances about the way this country is changing, and the fact that demographics are changing, and the U.S. Relative role in the world is declining. I mean, these are enormously complex issues that have domestic and foreign implications.
I want to point to everybody to your book, Here Right Matters. This is a quote from your testimony during the impeachment. And you can get that book on Amazon at the link provided. You can go into the show notes. The link will be there. Or just go to Amazon and type in Alex Vindman, or wherever you want to go find Alex's book. It'll be available. So I want to get into foreign policy for a minute, but I also have some other questions. I guess let's stick on foreign policy for a second. When you look at Russia, Ukraine, all of the Caucasus region, these are areas that are either past or on the brink of instability, right? The Crimea situation. And being as nice as I can say the Crimea situation, I'm not trying not to take a side. We have the Black Sea, we have access to oil. All of these things are really complex. How much do we need to be involved in this?
Yeah. It's interesting. We can't be involved everywhere all at once. We don't have the resources to do that. I kind of have a formula that I like to apply. I like to apply this, the amount of resources we have, the interests we have in the country, and the risks we have with regards to applying our resources. Like, let's say, there's a case to be made that applying resources in a place like Central Asia that's remote, that's much closer to home to Russia, we might not be able to achieve our objectives. But there are places in the world that are absolutely critical. And frankly, Ukraine is one of them. What people don't necessarily realize is there's a famous quote by a former national security advisor that goes something like, it should not be underestimated that Russia, absent Ukraine, ceases to become an empire. But Russia, with Ukraine subordinated and suborned, automatically becomes an empire. That's Zbigniew Brzezinski. And the point is that Russia, with Ukraine and internally incorporated, automatically becomes a much more potent adversary. So if we keep Ukraine out of Russia's hands, we make our life easier. If we actually make Ukraine a success, a prosperous nation, it draws Russia away from its tyrannical authoritarian tendencies. Because you can't have a country. Imagine, and there are precedents for this, by the way. You have a country that's referred to as Malorossiya, Little Russia, on your border, has a population of somewhere close to 50 million. You're the big boy on the block. You have a population of 130 million. If that country of 50 million is successful, prosperous, democratic, what happens to the population in Russia? They're like, oh well, I guess that's okay. They're different. Or do you say, wait, those people are exactly like us. Why can't we have what they have? And that's the kind of the very simplified version of why Ukraine is so critically important to the U.S. because it could really, over the long term, alleviate the challenges we have with Russia. I just see some folks scrolling across the bottom of the screen talking about who makes policy and chain of command and all that stuff. I think it's important to recognize that what you have, the president cannot be involved in every decision. There are too many decisions for the president to have. So what ends up happening is, by law, departments and agencies are delegated certain kinds of decisions. And at the National Security Council, I coordinated decisions at a certain level. My boss coordinated decisions at a more senior level. The national security advisor at a more senior level. And we operated within the authorities that we had, statutory authorities that we had. So there's a lot that you could do absent the president's attention. And in the case of Donald Trump, that's the way business was done. The president just really didn't have much interest in foreign policy. Where he did, it was frankly for self-promotion or some sort of other kind of affinity. This is how I talk about him. So it's just a fact. I saw it firsthand. And these were not policy disagreements. It's not like we decided to go in one direction. The president never directed any change in policy. As a matter of fact, he signed a document called the National Security Strategy, 2017, when he was in office. And that laid out a series of things that he expected the national security apparatus, departments and agencies to do. We were working on his guidance. What became apparent in my situation is that while we were working towards U.S. national security, the president was working towards self-interest. He was not working to advance U.S. national security. He was looking to find compromising information on Joe Biden. So like this, he could start the process of trying to steal the election. And as an Army officer, I was very reluctant to actually pin this on the president. Months before, I received word that this was coming from the president's office, and I was like, "There's no way that the president could be involved in something like this." So even in my the summaries that I had for my meetings, I'd be like, "Okay, this is coming from the Oval Office," but without attributing to the president. The only thing I learned in that July 25th phone call, was that in fact it was the president, and it was I heard it firsthand. The president call for this investigation, and at that point I couldn't deny it. And all I did was, do what I had been trained to do throughout my career, make on the spot corrections or, try to pass up what I
covered. A lot of this is covered, man. I don't want to cut you off, but I don't want to get distracted too much by this stuff. We can cover this a little bit, but we know the steps, right? And this is not to undermine what you're saying. It's just anybody can go listen to this stuff on any other show. I don't want to be that show.
Yeah,
One of the things I do want to ask you is, at what level is it inappropriate for an O5 to influence, even in your position? Because, rank matters. These things matter, right? It's like you're working 2 grades. I was a guy that worked above my grade a lot too. The Army's full of these situations. But there are times where I'm like, that's above my pay grade. Is that true with your job there for an O5? Were you working at a level where you had to have someone make sure they checked your work? Not that you weren't capable, but that someone else's ass is on the line. Well,
I think that's right. I mean, we, in the military and in the NSC, it's still a hierarchical process, right? So that's what I did was I basically reported up within the chain of command, within closed door classified channels, my concerns to the right authorities, the legal shop that had some sort of oversight role. Legal wasn't habitually part of the NSC. It only actually joined the NSC after the Tower Commission reports and after the Iran-Contra scandal, because Congress indicated that there needed to be some oversight. And if the oversight wasn't internal, then they were going to do something else that would have been far more kind of, it was going to be more challenging for the executive branch. So legal had the oversight role, and I reported my concerns to legal for that reason, to ensure that, more senior folks could then say, potentially counsel the president, have him change course, because they say, okay, well, our analysis is that this is potentially illegal, this is problematic, you need to do this. And that's where basically my obligations started and ended. I didn't dwell on this. I made my report, and then I went back to work and started preparing for a deputies committee meeting literally the next day. So I wasn't like one of those things I deliberated on. I did what I could, and then I passed it up to more senior folks to try to do something about it.
Fair enough. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you about with regards to what you reported, I mean, look, I'm a counterintelligence guy by trade, right? And we see you get a Saida briefing every year or every 6 months, whatever the rule is now, right? We're constantly looking for this subversion and espionage directed against the Army. And a little while ago, you talked about the erosion of our trust in institutions in general, right? On different elements in the political spectrum. When I'm a small government guy by nature, more libertarian, but I lean left on a lot of issues. I'm a hypocritical mess, right? I just don't even listen to me if you want to get an idea of what I am, you got to ask me. But when Hillary Clinton walks takes responsibility for TSSCI multiple times being on our home server. You and I both know you put a thumb drive with no foreign in a non-class system, we're losing our clearance, probably, going to have some significant things. As a counterintelligence agent, I look at that and I think, what on earth are we doing? What is the FBI doing? How do I take them seriously? And then you see this stuff with Peter Strzok and all these people that are, and I'm going to put a pin in that. Okay, with that, plus you see an entire party constantly trying to undermine the legitimate election of Donald Trump. And so they're running and winning on, we want to go get impeachments, right? Yeah. All of these things are undermining. If you're in one party, it's great. It's the best thing ever. It's a party. We're going after this guy. 25th Amendment was being talked about from before he was inaugurated, right? So we have all of this insanity on the left, coupled with this insanity on the right, and it's just tearing us apart. Yeah. When you look at this, now I'm not going to ask you to speak on Hillary Clinton or any of those kind of things, but we understand like the landscape is we got a lot of problems here, man. Like we got a lot of people who don't. The CIA's credibility has been shot. The FBI, same thing. There's so many people to like, unless your kid is kidnapped, we're like those guys are corrupt because they've acted corrupt. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I guess we do tend to fall into political camps. Like I wrote a critical piece on Mark Milley, and I took some heat for it. But I took a principled position on what the chairman's role is to remain apolitical and to, basically not seek to undermine civilian control of the military. And, it fell to political camps. People were like, well, now he's a darling of the left, so we need to protect him, even though he was wrong. Back then, there was plenty of criticism against him walking through Lafayette Square, and then January 6th on the lethargic response. So it's a problem. It's a huge problem that and part of this is because both sides see a enormous threat and urgency that other things like ethics and standards and values could fall by the wayside because it's the future of the country at stake. So we need to stay with our party but that's not the way I see the world. That's a slippery slope. That's a situational ethics. We need to continue to adhere to principles and take principled stands. And that's the way, that's why, I'll take criticism from the right and the left based on the fact that I'm demanding accountability. Now, with regards to institutions, I got to tell you, I'm in a different starting place.
Okay.
And my experience is that we have some, and you know this too. Sometimes it's hard to separate individuals from the institutions. We know that those institutions are filled with phenomenal public servants, people that love this country, people that could do something else but choose to serve in a public in a public institution for the common good. And that's what we have. And that might not be everybody. We've all encountered whatever, lazy this or incompetent that, but by and large these are phenomenal folks, excellent military officers, excellent soldiers, excellent FBI agents, excellent intelligence officers. What we have an issue with right now is somehow we disaggregate all those people that constitute the organization from the institution and all the negativity surrounding it. And I think that logical disconnect is troubling to me, because we know the people that populate the institution are great, but somehow we think that the institutions themselves are bad. That's strange. What I think there is it's hard to separate propaganda and disinformation from reality. And none of these things are quite as complex, as simple as the sound bites that we've now fallen into with regards to email servers or kind of deep state CIA agents or FBI. I don't think that's actually. I don't think those are entirely right. I mean, I haven't spent a huge amount. I'm a foreign policy guy. I haven't spent an enormous amount of time looking at these, but I could tell you in 2016, the Russians very much attempted to undermine our elections, and that there was an enormous amount of evidence to suggest that there was at minimum a convergence of interest between Trump campaign folks and the Russians, and that could very well amount to collusion. I think, frankly, we have a long report on this, the Mueller report, that indicates that there was at minimum convergence and there potentially was collusion. So that's different than the rhetoric that you might hear from far right media, the rhetoric you could hear from entertainment shows and stuff like that on Fox. And it's really just at this point, it's nearly impossible unless you're spending an enormous amount of time looking at these issues to figure out what's true and what's not true.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much of it is how much are Hillary Clinton's email server, shenanigans relevant in 2021. Maybe they were relevant in 2016, but that contest was decided. Trump won that contest. I think, frankly, he won that contest even with Russian support. He probably won it on his own. That's the way I talk about it.
And this isn't about Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, but on June 27th, when Bill Clinton is on Loretta Lynch's airplane, the day that his wife is being deposed, her campaign never recovered from that moment. That was like a point, and it dropped significantly.
I remember that.
And it's just like, and these are the things that I think undermine or prove to someone who's on the fence. And again, this is not right, not left, but these are the things that happen.
It's a data point that potentially substantiates, your preconceived notions. And I think, I'm sure that poor guy gets crushed by Hillary Clinton on a regular basis for that major error in judgment and having that conversation. I mean, that could have changed a lot potentially. But even so, I still think that Donald Trump tapped into something. He tapped into a kind of grievance in the United States. But he did two things. One, he tapped into a grievance amongst the population and consolidated a base. And at the other side, on the other side of the equation, there was an apathy and a complacency around Hillary Clinton. She just didn't excite people. So those two things allowed Trump, in my view, to potentially take 2016. In 2020, though, I mean, the left was mobilized in an unprecedented way, and by sheer numbers, 81 million votes for Joe Biden. That's a crushing victory, and a crushing defeat for Donald Trump. So that's hard to argue, though.
Let's all be clear here. One, Donald Trump, whatever good he did, does not equal the self-harm he caused to his own campaign, and on purpose. Like, you're the president, your job's already hard. Stop purposefully picking fights you don't have to fight that you can't win anyhow. And whether or not Joe Biden, the election is compromised. We have to say that, right? We have to be honest and say that Joe Biden's election is compromised because of all of the shenanigans there too. However, Joe Biden got a crap load of votes.
I don't know if I agree, and I guess how is it compromised?
Well, I'm just saying, based upon the fact that there's tens of millions of people that are like, what happened here?
You mean it's compromised as in people just don't believe in the credibility?
Right.
No, I think that's great. That's a troubling.
It is. It's a big problem. And look, like, if you and I were going to go out and we were going to count votes, let's say I'll play the Republican, you'll play the Democrat. And I'm not assigning us parties.
I want to play the Republican.
Okay, you play the Republican, I'll be the Democrat. And we're counting votes. And you and I are sitting there. And if you, for one instant, say, hey, I can't see what you're doing, I'm going to say, let's stop and let's get this right. Because more important to be above board on that. We've lost sight of that, I think. We're putting up wood around things, pushing people out of zones. These are problems where you legally comply with the law, but you're not.
Pete,
I'm going
to have to disagree with you on this one, because I'll put it this way. There were some 30 lawsuits filed, and Trump won none of them. He had a whole action in one.
I'm not saying that Donald Trump.
There was nothing. They didn't meet the threshold of what a impartial, independent, apolitical judge would determine warrants a violation or some sort of infraction. I think what you hit on earlier is actually much, much more important. Is that we have tens of millions of people that believe that Biden is an illegitimate president. Maybe you could equate that to the tens of millions of people that didn't think that Trump was a legitimate president in 2016. But now we have two elections in which there's a pattern of a large segments of the population not accepting.
Yeah.
And that is a hallmark of our system, is that there's a peaceful transition of power between two parties. The losing party accepts its fate, has to come up with better ideas, and win through ideas, win through policies, win through better ideas. And right now, we don't have to do that. We're going into a world where you could just not come up with anything good. You could have no platform going into 2020 election the way Donald Trump was, and that you're electing a personality, not an idea, not a series of ideas, because coming out of the Republican National Committee, there was no platform for the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So I think this is just troubling. We want to make our politicians, elected officials, work really, really hard to get our votes. And right now they're being lazy and they're getting away with just saying nonsensical stuff.
I agree. And let me hammer the Republicans for a minute. Senators, Jordan, Graham, fill in the blank, McConnell, get off your ass and do something, right? And let me take us back to the foreign policy side, because I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Because you said in the thing I was reading, I think it was your interview when you sat with Arnold, you guys did a bit of a panel, that you're laser focused on accountability. Here's the thing that's troubling to me. And for all of the problems of the Trump administration, I was never terribly embarrassed by all of it. It's Donald Trump. He's kind of a walking embarrassment. But our behavior, our decision-making on the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and all of how many times did the Secretary of Defense or the CENTCOM commander say, we've turned the corner, right?
Oh my gosh. I'm right there with you, brother.
Why is nobody fired over this? And we have Miley now, first off, undermining a president and talking to China about big problems with this, right? How do you trust all these things?
Yeah.
And I'm not picking sides here, but we have all of these problems. Secretary Austin has failed twice now to withdraw his forces from a place without causing havoc and chaos and eruption. Milken, same thing. Joe Biden, same thing. Joe Biden walked into Iraq and said, I have to improve this deal. Failed to do it, managed to piss off Maliki in the process and empowered Iran. And he's like, well, this is the greatest deal ever, right? So and this is not Democrats. This is our foreign policy being played out. We have people that have failed dramatically. And you and I both know that the ability for terrorism to grow out of Afghanistan is exponentially worse now.
Well, this is one of the reasons that not having two viable, serious parties.
We agree.
Is a problem, because under normal circumstances, right, you would have the Republican Party savage. You agree with him or not, and frankly, I kind of agree with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, while being highly critical about the way it was executed. But agree with him or not, you could have a Republican Party right now on the merits be highly critical of Joe Biden and say this was a failure.
Right.
But the problem is that nobody cares about that, because that's overseas. That's the foreign. That's credibility with our allies and partners, extremely important. But we have much more bigger fish to fry domestically, which is the future of this country. So you have the left continuing to stay rock solid behind them, and the right, who's maybe even somewhat valid criticism, gets set aside because there's a bigger fear about the resurgence of Trump and or the rise of Trumpism. That's one of the biggest dangers, is that we now could fall into a space where we have a Democratic Party that consistently wins elections. I'm not saying it's going to, but could consistently win elections.
No, I hear
you.
you.
It's unchecked because there are not ideas that are credible from that are taken seriously from the right.
This is so true. It was true about the left. You had all these years, this horrible candidate, and the person you picked to run is Joe Biden. Not because he had the ideas, but they thought he could win. Tulsi Gabbard, I don't agree with her on a lot of things. I don't agree with most presidents on a lot of things. I can get behind that she's a person of character. Andrew Yang, probably a person of character, someone that has a chance of creating some unity. And then here we are, same position for the Republicans. And who is the most likely person to run? It's Donald Trump. You guys can't find. Can we find someone better? We have to have higher caliber.
We do. We have a two-party system that has a lock on elections, and and in certain places those are not competitive elections. I think closed primaries instead of open primaries, closed primaries actually could further radicalize candidates, because you're now competing which one is going to be more extreme, instead of open primaries where basically elements of either party or independents could go ahead and vote for somebody, and there's a need for that person to then basically come across as a moderate. With closed primaries, we can't do that. So that's part of the stranglehold that both parties have on the electoral system. And in a lot of ways, one of the reasons that we're facing the challenges we have is our democracy has not necessarily kept pace with the changes and the demands of the population.
No, I agree.
We have not had the kinds of reforms that allow the population to believe that democracy is accountable, responsible to them as voters. And part of that is, again, the two-party system and its stranglehold. And I don't know, there's no easy solution to this.
No,
I think there's some reforms that potentially could come in that, would weaken the hold, and the parties have to accept this, could weaken their hold where it's open primaries. That could be a huge way to de-radicalize candidates. And then, hopefully we get better candidates. I also find myself, falling victim to maybe holding some of my fire on shortfalls by President Biden. I think in my view, there's not enough on accountability. He needs to be doing more on accountability and what I view as corruption of institutions under the Trump administration. Some people might not like that, but I think there needs to be more done on accountability. I think with regards to...
But is Joe Biden capable of doing that? He is that. He is party corruption, right? He's never going to put the party behind initiative. Maybe at the end when he's almost done being president. But
well, my point was a little bit different. I'm not sure if I agree with that. Okay. He's a lifelong public servant, and that you might disagree with his policies, but there's no way that guy does not love this country and does not want.
I'm not saying he doesn't love the country, but he is a person who plagiarizes and has been caught lying, stealing other people's stuff. So I mean, look, he's a politician, right? These guys aren't honest. And when was the last president to not
should it be lower for politicians, or should it be higher?
Oh, I agree. I agree.
Yeah. It should be higher. We shouldn't, that rhetoric about he's a politician. I find that troubling. Yes, the bar continues to fall for politicians. Yeah. They could lie, now it's acceptable for them to lie, cheat, and steal, and say, wait, that's just a politician. But they should be held to a higher standard. If a normal citizen falls short sometimes, I'm far from perfect. But if a normal citizen falls short, that's one thing. But an elected official that's supposed to represent the community should be held to a much, much higher standard. And that, certainly if Biden, falls short in certain areas, in my view, Trump fell short in, most areas, just as like a good person. He did not pass. People, I remember hearing this conversation about people holding their breath or holding their nose as they voted for him because, they thought that he could do, but that's not what we should be doing for a politician.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I want to get away from this topic because there's more, you have more intelligent things to say. Not that these things are dumb, but this is the kind of common thing that we can hear a lot of places again. When we continue to vote for the lesser of two evils, we're still voting for evil. We have to get away from that. We have to. I think we agree on that.
I think so.
When you go to make this move, right? So PFC Manning was sitting, I don't know, an office or two away in a 2 shop. I'm in a secondary shop off of that. Mm. And he and Peter Van Buren, a fellow whistleblower as well. We both were sitting there and we both wondered out loud to ourselves, if PFC Manning had come to us and said, what's your advice? What's your counsel? Should I do this? And I would say, you've got to follow your conscience on this. These are not easy decisions. I don't think what you made was an easy decision. And I'm not going to sit in judgment of you over it, because if I was in that position, listen, I've been in the position as a counterintelligence agent where I saw a security violation, knew that nobody would care, but felt morally obligated to report it because that is the law, right? Like you have to report it. And I reported it, and it only caused me hassle and grief. But I did it, right?
You could live with yourself, right? You knew that you did the right thing.
Right. So I can appreciate all of that you did. I also was overseas deployed. We had a person who was struggling with their mental health, and this is right after that guy went in on his massacre in the villages in Afghanistan. That's probably 2011. She says to me, and I'm getting ready to physically take her weapon from her. And as you know, as an infantry guy, that includes me possibly punching her in the face because I'm afraid of what she'll do with her weapon. And that makes sense to an infantry guy, but not the rest of the audience. Sometimes you have to take someone's weapon from them, whether they want it or not. So she looks at me and the emotions are changing across her face like a cartoon character. And I'm like, I'm worried about your mental health. I'm worried about you harming yourself. And she stops, looks me dead in the eye and says, I'm not the suicidal type. I'm the homicidal type. Yeah. Alex. I did not punch her, and I did not take her up, but I started whenever I could. I'd get her magazine, I'd peel off rounds because I didn't know what she was going to do. So I tell my friend about it, and we're keeping her on a very specific watch. Tell the local commander because we were on a secondary camp, and we're kind of keeping our eye on her. We think we can deflate it, which is ultimately the thing. We aren't just going to put her in her rack and have her sit there because we have this is above my pay grade, right? So we come back. I obviously report this to my team leader. She goes to mental health. They give her a clean bill of health. My team leader wants her gone because you can't say these things, right? And it becomes like this nothing thing. And I'm like, oh my God. So we have this team meeting to try to deal with some team strife. This will sound familiar. This person was kind of Trumpian. And she says to me in the meeting, and I said, she's going to say she was joking and undermine this thing, right? And so I'm like, and I'm still troubled about this statement that you made to this person on the team. And this is in front of the entire team. And and I don't think you were joking. And she says, I wasn't joking. And I look around the team to see if anybody else just heard what I heard. She just said it. She didn't say it literally again, but she admitted that she had said she's more, about homicide than suicide. And nobody heard it that way. But I was still compelled to like I have to report this. She's done this again.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is and this is for more than for the audience, you can sit in the room and hear something that you're like, oh my God, this is a problem. And have nobody else around you hear it because they're not listening for that thing. They're listening to the call, listening into the context, whatever.
Yeah.
When you take this to your brother and you elevate it up the chain, I think you're doing the right thing according to what you think is right. And again, I'm not going to fault you for that. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the Democrats used you as a pawn because the entire impeachment was like all the Democrats against all the Republicans, right? Blassey Ford, same thing. They could have acted completely different, honorably, and said, if this is true, let's get to investigating it right now. Instead, they held it, they shrunk the timeline, and they tried to create stress on the process instead of handling it seriously, right? They did not treat her report as something that they took seriously in terms of her personal value. And I think the Democrats did the same thing to you. Do you feel like the thing you reported was taken seriously?
It wasn't taken seriously by the attorneys in the National Security Council. Even one of the reasons I pulled my brother in is because when I made that report on July 10th, when the National Security Council advisor was meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart, I didn't think they were taking it seriously, and it only by them not taking it seriously that first time, and kind of saying this is wrong, it allowed the whole July 25th event to unfold also. If they had done their job that time, it wouldn't be. So I pulled my poor twin brother that, it didn't have to be involved. I drew him into this thing because I wanted him to also be a witness. And I didn't want a situation in which, I said one thing and that attorney said, I said something else. And I didn't want that kind of situation because this was too important. This was what I thought was our democracy was on the line.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure this was taken seriously. And I also, recognize that my job was to continue to try to provide the president the best advice I could. And that was by passing the consensus views of the entire agency, which I ended up doing all the way to the deputies level and saying, this is what we should be doing. This is what advances U.S. national security interests. And that includes unfreezing, security assistance and having closer ties with Ukraine and so forth. If it wasn't taken seriously by the White House, it seemed to be taken seriously elsewhere. So there was a whistleblower that shared a concern that then the acting ODNI chief found credible and troubling and was obligated to pass to, because that's an important, this is a 3-star Navy admiral that also said that, when he looked at the report, said, this is troubling. And then when that made its way to Congress, which has an oversight role, has a specific role, a balance of power, had an oversight role over the executive branch. It's a part of our check and balances system to make sure we don't become an authoritarian country. That thought that this warranted an investigation. And it warranted an investigation for a couple of different reasons. One, because of the president's abuse of power. Two, because it undermines national security. And it harmed a relationship that was critical to U.S. national security. And, where if the Democrats took it on its merits, the Republicans saw a completely different political urgency. And their political urgency was they had a client, the president, the head of their party, that was being attacked by the opposite political party. So, in my view, they couldn't even look at the case on their merits. There had to be the defense attorney willing to defend their client at all costs. And I write about this in the book. I mean, the interesting thing about the book is that it's not about like this episode. It's about what was it in my background that kind of consolidated into a way to manage this thing. What was it that I learned from the military, from combat, from being an attaché to kind of make the best decisions I could under the most unprecedented of circumstances. And I think, honestly, these issues are political and get politicized. So I could understand, the right thinking that, it's just a way to attack their president, and we go into factional blocks. But that's not. I mean, I think I've demonstrated that by taking heat, by demanding accountability from regardless of which side. And I thought it was the right thing to do. And I also knew that was one situation in which I knew that it was above my pay grade. And the best I could do was offer, factual firsthand accounts of what I witnessed, and then leave it up to senior people that are at that pay grade to make decisions. And that's the only thing I could do, and just deal with the consequences.
No, I think that's fair. And it's one of the things I wanted to give you a chance to talk about, because it's always soundbited down to something that doesn't make any damn sense. A couple things we know, and again, we've kind of covered some of this stuff. The Democrats openly said we're trying to impeach the president, right? And that is seeking to undermine his legitimate election constantly. Whether there's anything there or not, people ran on that and got elected. And then you have someone like Joe Biden, again, the lesser of two evils. Well, here's a guy who likely has done exactly what the president was asking about. But there is a better mechanism for the president to do this than to.
I mean, I don't know, but I don't think that's true. I think this is the Afghanistan stuff.
Look, there's a lot of problems with President Biden, but you have someone that has a lot of problems. They have a lot of garbage out there, and at the time, what we knew and what we know now are different things. But if this person is going to be president, and there is the potential for corruption, and was he selling access? Was he holding back aid as well? These are legitimate questions that I think as Americans we all want answered. Do we want the president going after a political rival in the foreign policy way? I don't know that that's the right way either.
Well, I'll tell you, in my expert in quotes opinion, I don't think there's any substance to these to these accusations against against Biden that I have seen. I mean, a lot of this is like the whole like deny, counter accuse, and keep denying methodology that I see it practiced firsthand by authoritarians,
But he is on video openly saying he withheld aid to get something from another foreign.
Are we talking about the $1 billion secured loan for Ukraine?
I believe so. It's been a while.
So let me explain that one. He was acting on policy prescriptions and the recommendations of not just the U.S. but our allies on what to do. So look, there are different tools that the presidents use to achieve U.S. foreign policy interests. The key thing about them is that it's not their own interests that they're advancing. They're advancing U.S. national policy interests. In that case, he was advancing U.S. national policy interests. The difference between him and Trump fundamentally was that Trump was attempting to advance not foreign policy interests. He's actually harming him.
No, I get what you're saying.
His own.
Yeah.
And in that case, he was it was probably stupid. I shouldn't say this about the president, but it's probably not cool for the president to do that. It was not a smart thing to do, even though he's out of office, because there was no need to talk like that. That's undiplomatic, and and what he did was it undermined his principled position to advance U.S. national security. But there was nothing to that, as far as I can tell.
But I think there's another incident too that I was talking about. Either way, who cares about all that? More importantly, what I want people to do is go out and get your book. It's called Here Right Matters. And what we've been talking really with Alex about is accountability within our system. There it is. There's that book right there. And what I appreciate that you did was you put yourself on the line. Now, I'm going to be critical of you one thing. You go up to your brother. You absolutely know that if you do this, you're going to lose your job in the National Security Council. You know that that's true. I mean, and you may take your brother with you. And that's part of the reason I'm guessing why you guys talk, because you've got to sound this out. You can't go against any boss that hard and expect to keep your job.
Yeah.
You also know as an 05 that you're going to be fine. I know that it's hard. I'm not saying you didn't get death threats. I'm not saying, but you're also going to have a retirement as an 05, and you're going to be employable. And you've talked about like you've got opportunities at Yale and Stanford and all these things. So when you look at this, did you really balance out the career impact and say, look, being a retired 06, retired 05, there's a difference there, but you can make that up by getting out earlier.
Well, I'll tell you that. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. So I'll tell you, early on, before all this stuff unfolded, there was a point in time in which I considered, was it the right time? Hitting the 20-year mark, as anybody at that point does, is like, is it time to move on? There's this whole thing about like, every day you spend beyond 20, you're working for half salary or something.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
But I made the decision, because I had a pretty awesome career. I made the decision well before this that I wanted to stay on. I wanted to go to war college, and I wanted to serve in places of critical importance. I mean, money was not and is not that, it makes life easier, but it wasn't a driving force behind this. What I thought I could do is I thought I could continue to serve and get non-monetary compensation, like job satisfaction, by staying in the military. So I set that aside way before this whole thing occurred. So my plan was to go. I already knew I was selected for Senior Service College, for War College. That was, I actually found out about that the day after I was subpoenaed, and I was pretty excited about it. But my calculations were not about self-interest. What I thought what I was doing behind closed doors was like, yes, I might be risking my super cool job at the White House, some pretty awesome position, something that I worked really hard for. I thought I'd be risking that, but I didn't really think I was going to risk my military career. I frankly thought that maybe I had the Army would and the military would have my back. And that was really one of the most disappointing things, is that I realized that I became kind of radioactive, and nobody wanted to get radiation poisoning.
Yeah.
And kept even folks that I've known for decades.
You could be disappointed with that, but you're not surprised by that.
No, I mean, I frankly probably was. I mean, I wasn't surprised by the vindictiveness of the Trump administration. They had firing Fridays and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed and maybe a little surprised. I think I was, because my wife, after I had this conversation with General McConville, she was like, "You're toast," and I was stubborn and hard-headed. And for the next 7 months, I was like collecting data points to figure out, well, what is the deal? Or do I have a career? And ultimately, I dropped my retirement paperwork on the very last day I could. 30 days after the RFO, I dropped my retirement paperwork. Otherwise, I would incur an ADSO. And that was after being told that I didn't have a career as a FAO. I would need a rehabilitative assignment. By a 4-star told me that the military had held up the promotion list for 4 months, and many of my buddies, were trying to figure out if they were promoted or not. And then ultimately, what tipped this whole thing over the edge is Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, called in Secretary Esper and McCarthy and berated them for having the audacity to consider putting my name on the list. Anyway, I submitted my retirement on a Wednesday. I had my retirement orders on Friday. How do you like that? That is like a miracle for Army bureaucracy.
Let me ask you another question too. Go before the call on the 25th, and be honest. Did you think that you had 07 general potential in your career? I mean, because FAO gets really peaky at 05, right? It's really hard to get up.
It does get very, very peaky. I mean, I was guaranteed 06, even though the board hadn't met.
Yep.
Because
but that's often the end for a lot of people, and they know it going in.
That's true, but there was a pretty good chance, frankly. Okay. And the reason I could say that is that there were no peers or nobody in the adjacent year groups that had my kind of experience. And I had also the really superb evaluations, and I had the kind of network and connections that could have been helpful. So I mean, nothing is guaranteed. It's almost like the stars need to align. But I was probably about as competitive as I could be, and maybe in a group of like 3 or 5 people that would have been competitive for that. So
and competitive competitive is all you really ask for at '05, looking at '06. I mean, can I be competitive for '07? Okay. And then, who knows what happens? They make you a DCO for a non-deployed brigade, and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Or,
That's right.
and it's not bad. These aren't bad jobs. It's just these, hey, why don't you relax now, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, but I thought I had at least another couple. I thought I could get to Moscow as a military attaché, maybe be the DAT in Ukraine, a bunch of other places, and really potentially make a difference. And that was the calculation, not like, deeper is all kind of speculative.
Yeah. No, I get you. Yeah, I'm not asking about 08 and that kind of thing. But I appreciate your candor on that because, that's stuff that somebody who's not in the military at a high level doesn't understand, that there is a calculus to all this stuff. And you do look at what you're risking. And it does suck to have to go through all that. Peter Van Buren's career was destroyed by a crappy State Department, that tried to come after him. And oddly enough, the ACLU stepped in to save his butt and get him his retirement. So thanks for what you did, man. I know that's not easy to do. And you're trying to do the right thing. And I definitely believe in that. And folks are always going to be mad at you, but I'm not one of them. I appreciate anybody. I appreciate PFC Manning. I appreciate what Edward Snowden did. These important things have to happen. Well, listen, I'm not validating.
No, I'm talking. Pete, I appreciate, frankly, I have not had many opportunities to talk to folks that disagree with me. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to folks. And, I don't think I changed probably any minds, but at least they have a little bit more context, and they're not hearing like somebody else's thoughts on me. They can hear my own words or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully I asked you some new questions. Anything else you want to say in closing besides go buy this fantastic book called Here, Right Matters? There it is in the links. It'll be on the podcast side as well. Anything else you want to say in closing it off?
I think that's. I'll tell you that one of the things I'm invested in is I continue to try to serve the public interest outside of uniform. And, besides working on a doctorate at Johns Hopkins right now, doing a research trip out to the Pacific Coast and stuff like that. I also joined the board of something called the Renew Democracy Initiative. And we're really looking for solutions to, make our country stronger, make our democracy stronger, make it more resilient, make it more competitive. And, that's something that I hope even people, the detractors that don't agree with me, all kind of share a love of country. They just see a different threats, and the only thing I would ask is think about what could make this country stronger, and that's not dividing this country. That's figuring out ways that we could bring this country together. And I think there's a way to do that for the vast majority of the country. There'll be some fringe elements on both sides, but there's a way to bring this country together and make it stronger and more competitive moving forward. RDI, check out
RDI. Yeah,
that worked.
I mistyped it. I'm going to try to fix it right now while we're talking. That's what I get for going too fast, man.
Yep.
RDI.org. Here it is. And yeah, I appreciate it. And I love that you're trying to do that. And that speaks more to your character and your honesty than anything else, is the continued fight to try to find the right way to do it. I'm big on, you can't, neither Joe Biden or Donald Trump are good statesmen because they lack one of the three key things, and that's consensus building. They don't build consensus. They build the opposite of that, right? They polarize. And so we have to get away from party first. We have to get away from not representing. Talk about a democracy. How many people are not represented at all in this country because they're not part of a party, or because the other party is permanently in power? That's not part of what democracy is. I don't know how to fix that, but we have to have these conversations, and I appreciate you doing it.